But one of the things I forgot to talk about on the Conformity Culture Vultures, there's a couple of things that I do intend to do with this show. I just told you about the CoronaPanic. I want to do a series going through my entire experience from 2020 to the present, and to help keep myself sane. Not that I am sane, obviously I'm not. I'm sitting here in the middle of the night talking to myself. And you, Winston, don't forget, I'm not going to ignore you.
I am truly delighted.
But the reality is, CoronaPanic blindsided everybody. I look at it like any of the dissident left that hadn't been sufficiently captured by RussiaGate, and there was a few notable standouts: Glenn Greenwald, Jimmy Dore, Aaron Maté, Chris Hedges. You know, there's a kind of like a hardcore left, dissident left that managed to somehow survive Trump Derangement Syndrome and RussiaGate, because otherwise it kind of swallowed up all of the radical left. CoronaPanic managed to get those guys. And I mean, it managed to get all of them. It took like a year, it took like 2 years for even some of them to start to ask questions or to snap out of it. And the reason that happened is CoronaPanic took advantage of what is essentially not only a widespread endemicity of media illiteracy, because some of the people that managed to survive RussiaGate, for instance, people like Glenn Greenwald, he's certainly not media illiterate, but what he is and what all of them are, they are completely scientifically illiterate and innumerate. And they all sort of subscribe to this delusion that somehow science is pure and it's elevated above corruption. Say, unlike journalists and political figures who are easily corrupted by money, there's this widespread, utterly naive, infantile assumption that science is somehow above all of that, and that scientists exist in this kind of like technocratic elite realm where they only care about what's rational and what's reasonable, and then therefore their dictates are all informed by irrefutable logic and empiricism. Essentially, it's the dissident left version of believing in Santa Claus and his little elves. Although I would argue that there's more substance to the Santa Claus myth than the myth of the uncorruptible scientist. Now, to the credit of some of the people that I just mentioned, and I mean just a couple of them, say like the likes of Jimmy Dore, Max Blumenthal, eventually they snapped out of it a bit. They started to ask questions, and the contradictions in the corporate media narratives were becoming increasingly more clear to them. And they embarked upon what I essentially did in my own private life, which was an investigative inquiry into the science itself. Now, neither of them, especially Jimmy, who by his own admission is certainly not a math surgeon, neither of them are particularly well adept in that field, but they still have enough cognizance about them to question these obviously contradictory corporate media talking points. So they use their media literacy skills to compensate for perhaps a lack of scientific literacy. At the nadir of it, though, it was pretty bad. You had Jimmy Dore reading People magazine articles. Now, if you've ever seen Jimmy Dore, you see that he'll take corporate media pieces and just rip them to pieces. He's very critical of them. That's one of the things that I love about him. But he was so whipped up into a panic and fraught with so much anxiety during the initial stages of CoronaPanic, but this went on for years with the poor guy, that he was reading People magazine articles, not to mock them or to critique them as you would expect, but to tell you how bad the coronavirus was. And Aaron Maté, who became an absolute superstar, a dissident superstar because of his RussiaGate debunking, was literally at the lowest point of his entire professional life, was literally retweeting CNN articles, propaganda about the coronavirus or the vaccines and the vaccine safety and efficacy, but not ironically, not critically, in all sincerity. So where Trump Derangement Syndrome captured the minds of the dissident left, any of the outliers, any of the leftover bits were completely consumed by CoronaPanic.